everyone. This is Lee Perry, and welcome back to the Organizing to Victory podcast, where we're talking garage politics. Today, I have the honor of interviewing my dear friend, Eric Gray, the Executive Director of Christian Service Center, who also is running for House District 35. Eric is running because he is excited to be the voice for the most vulnerable people in our community up in Tallahassee when pushing back against some of the most extreme policies, while also fighting to be the voice for everyday people who don't get as strong of a seat at the table as corporate interests. Let's jump into my conversation with Eric. I don't know if you realize how special our guest is today, but Eric Gray is a name that I don't even need to explain because everyone already knows who Eric Gray is. And the fact that he's in my house, I'm like fangirling. And the fact that I get to call you a friend is even more spectacular to me. And the fact that you answer my calls is like, and so one day you're going to be governor and I'm going to get to say he was on my podcast.
I feel the same. I feel one day you're going to be ruling the world and I'm just going to be there to watch. So I feel the same.
So the reason why you're so spectacular in my eyes is because you're super well-rounded. You're super easy to talk to. You give off like really wholesome dad vibes. I'm
glad the smoke and mirrors are working. That's good.
But then you also have this diverse background of service and land use, and you can kind of talk to you about anything, and I feel like you would have a pretty in-depth knowledge about most topics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly, when people ask me questions, I just make up the answers and hope that they don't catch on. So it all works out.
And every once in a while you're right?
Every once in a while, yes.
Well, today I'm super excited because you are currently running for House District 35. Most people are going to see a lot of the content that you put out, but I don't know how much people are going to see you. And so if this is our first opportunity to really peel back, who you are and talk deeper about your personal why, I'm really honored to be able to have that opportunity to do it.
It's very nice of you to even ask and take the time.
So tell me a little bit about where were you born and where are you from?
Sure. I'm Floridian through and through as much as you can. I born in Jacksonville, grew up a little bit in Tallahassee, raised mostly in Tampa, where I went to junior high and high school, undergrad in Gainesville, and then been here in Orlando for 25 years. My family is actually from the Panhandle in an area called Franklin County near Apalachicola in a really small little fishing village called Carabel. And if you've ever been to St. George Island for vacation, that's basically where my family's from, but going back into the late 1700s. So my family's been here for a very long time, since before Florida was a state. And they're not a wealthy family. They just have been around for a long time. And so most everybody in my family grew up in very humble beginnings. My dad likes to remind us that he was using an outhouse, until he was a teenager. And we're not that far removed from dirt floors and bare feet. So it's a great place to live. It's a great place to grow up. And for me, it's not just a place we visit. This is definitely home.
What got you to Orlando?
So I went to grad school at the University of Kentucky. I studied public administration and nonprofit management. And I was looking for a job in the nonprofit sector. I wanted to be in service, and this was my way of doing it. And I looked at different opportunities, Naples, Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville. And when I visited Orlando, I just kind of fell in love with the community. It felt like the right vibe. It just felt like the right place to be. I had just had my first daughter. My wife and I had a first daughter. She's only 6 weeks old when I came to pick out a house and decided to take a job here. And my first job in the community was at the Orange County Regional History Center downtown on Central Boulevard, which is still the same road I work on today. And it was a great place to kind of get your start in Orlando, because I learned everything there is to know about Orlando and Orange County. And I don't think I really appreciated the connections and the context until much later on in my career. But it was a really, really special place to work. And it's still a great place to be. I love visiting there.
I love that you're deeply rooted in Florida, because you've probably had a chance to see Florida in many of its different stages and many of its different ecosystems, and just really get to see the beauty of Florida. Yeah,
I don't look at the idea that I'm, a seventh generation Floridian as necessarily any badge of honor. It just is what is. It's just there. But I really do appreciate the parts of the state that most people don't visit, that maybe driving past. And you got little communities like Carabel, East Point, and Apalachicola in the Panhandle, but you also got communities like Cedar Key and Stark and Palatka and Wauchula and these small communities, Lake Placid. These are beautiful communities all over the state that really underscore how important small towns are to the entire growth of a state. We think of the populations of Orlando and Jacksonville, Tampa, and particularly Miami as being the real crux of the community. And certainly they are where most of the population lives. But this is still a very rural state. And it's very much a southern state in a lot of people's minds. But it's also an incredibly diverse state. So just here in Orange County, we have, last count, 183 languages and dialects spoken here. There are not very many communities in the world where you have that kind of diversity. And I think that we have a real blessing and an opportunity here to get to know lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds and cultures. And it's just a great place to be. I mean, Orlando was pushed to be the state capital at one point. There's still a plaque at the state capitol that talks about the initiative to move the capital from Tallahassee to Orlando. And it makes a lot more sense because it's right in the center of the state. But Orlando is really unique in that it's one of the largest communities in the country, not on any type of navigable body of water. So it's a very young community, and it's the fastest growing community in the country east of the Mississippi. It's nationally the fastest growing, second only to Las Vegas. And it's an incredibly young community. The idea that we're only 150 years old, when you look at communities like St. Augustine, that's over 500 years old, is really amazing. And so we're young, we're fiery, we're aggressive, we're ambitious, and we are doing some pretty big things here. It's pretty cool to be here in Orlando.
Well, I love that you're running to be a representative in the Florida House, because working in Tallahassee and getting to know some of our legislators, some of them have never really left their small bubble, but yet they're legislating broadly, representing, the whole state in a lot of their decisions. So the fact that you've been able to bounce around and see how different communities are impacted by different issues gives you a really informed and open-minded sense outside of just your local community.
Yeah, and the district that I'm living in and I'm running for is East Orange County and East Osceola County, and these are beautiful parts of the state. Some of them incredibly rural, incredibly environmentally sensitive, and it's in a huge district. It goes all the way down to Yeehaw Junction and State Road 60, right across from like Okeechobee and Highlands County. And so, you get a district that's basically 90 miles north to south in length, but it's not unlike a lot of other districts. My Uncle Will was a state representative in District 10 about 25 years ago, which is up there in Franklin County. And it was a huge district, just land-wise as well. And he did a lot of walking, get around to see everybody. And when I'm in the Florida House, God willing, I think that one of the things that I'm sure will happen is, sure, I'm representing my district. There's no question. But I understand the whole rest of the state too. And it's really hard to think about Florida without thinking about the various diverse sections of the state with the amazing people who live there. Everything from Key West, all the way up to Pensacola. It's just a fantastic place to be. We get a bad rap, the Florida man type of feel of things, and there's some weird stuff that happens here. And I guess anytime you have this much sunshine all the time, people are going to get a little crazy. But we're one of the largest states in the country. I believe we're the fourth largest state in the country population wise, and we're pretty powerful in the sense that there's a lot of votes, electoral votes coming out of Florida. There's a lot of industry coming out of Florida. We have some of the largest ports anywhere in the country, and so we're not small potatoes here. This is big time.
Yeah, and it's important because I feel like a lot of the quote unquote culture wars are kind of born and kind of challenged here in Florida. And yet some of the issues that are obviously nonpartisan issues, there's an opportunity to really speak to those issues and sway people. So for example, your district overlaps with parts of Commissioner Kelly Semrad, that, I ran her campaign, and overwhelmingly Republicans voted for her, and she's a progressive Dem. but it was because she was speaking to the issues that really matter. She was speaking on fiscal responsibility and smart growth and ensuring that our tax dollars are going into serving people. And I found that really fascinating because I think there's a strong push for partisanship to just split people that then informs strategy on a campaign on like what you should and should not say. But I feel like you're a perfect candidate to be able to transcend that because you have years and years of a record of service. And yet you're also able to speak to the hearts of people that might look across the aisle and say, I don't really want to talk to those folks. You might actually be able to bridge that gap. Have you thought about how important your ability of transcending that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think about like when George W. Bush ran for president back in 2000, and a lot of his campaign was about bringing the left and the right together. I think that in many ways was sort of a good way to get a gig. And because what he really did was he was bringing the right and the far right together and into a coalition that has maintained quite a bit of strength. I think the major distinction right now in not just Florida politics, but national and frankly even international politics is really not as much dealing with the left and the right, but the top and the bottom. Right. There's this widening wealth gap that 20 years ago, we were just starting to talk about and people weren't even sure. It's kind of like climate change. There were a few people that were outliers thinking, is that real or not? And now we're getting to the same place where I think everybody understands the climate's changing, regardless of your politics. And I think everybody understands that the wealth gap is changing too. I was telling you earlier, 158 donors made up half of all the contributions in the last campaign cycle, 158 people. And I mean, that's less than a third of the people in Congress. And so there's an incredible influence that people with wealth have brought. And that really all stems from the 2010 Citizens United decision. And we have got to find a way to get that under control. I do know a number of the people in the Central Florida legislative delegation, both Republicans and Democrats. And I will say that I'm friendly with most all of them. I went to college with a few of them, Republicans and Democrats. But I think that the distance between us has a lot to do with money. And right now, I think what you're seeing is there are a lot of people who have allowed themselves to be influenced by money, not in a way that is necessarily criminal or even unethical, but in a way that says, well, gosh, this person must be really important. And I must really need to listen to their decision because they have a lot of power and a lot of money because of all the land they own or the businesses they run. And I really need to listen to them. But when you do that and you're listening to that person over your neighbor who just has a regular run-of-the-mill job at the post office, that's where we start to get into trouble. And I think, I do like being able to communicate with people, but as far as like bringing the left and the right together, I don't think that's possible right now. I really don't. I think the issue now is making sure that people understand that this is the bottom versus the top. And I think that rural Republicans who don't have private schools, whose money is going to private schools and from their communities, and they're like, hey, we don't have private schools here. You have rural Republicans who are struggling because of tariff issues, who are struggling because they don't have access to health care. Hospitals in their areas can't stay open because Medicaid hasn't expanded. I think a lot of rural Republicans, people are rural is even a strong word. Even people who aren't in urban cores are really starting to say like, wait a second, this doesn't feel right to me. They don't want to say that publicly, but I think a lot of that has to do with the brainwash effect that Fox News has brought upon so many people in my generation and my parents' generation. And frankly, now even in my children's generation, we're starting to see it amongst high school students. And I think that when you pile on this messaging time and time again, that is truly trying to play to people's most base instincts, you're getting into some dangerous waters where it's really hard to get out of. But I do think that there's room to talk amongst both parties and independents about the challenges between the top and the bottom. I think that's where I think that's where we're all going to be able to come together, because it's getting really dangerous.
I see a little bit of similarities between your story and my story, because from my perception, you're a man of faith. You pretty much had your quote unquote dream job because you were able to have this life fully dedicated to service through a Christian service center and being able to be on the front lines and helping people who are in the most vulnerable situations. Nothing gets closer to God than that, in my opinion.
Me too.
I feel the same way, like as a climate activist working in the nonprofit world, where I got to plant trees all day and nurture nature and be able to teach people how to grow their own food and live healthier lives symbiotically with the planet. I was living my dream life in the nonprofit sector. And then 2020 happened. And just the fact that Florida went so red so fast, and then seeing the insurrection, I had to jump into politics, which was such an unfamiliar and uncomfortable place for me. And, I can see it in you all the time when I talk to you. Like, you have a hard time talking about yourself. You deflect and talk about other issues or other people, because as a man of service, it's not about you. But something pushed you over the ledge to jump into politics. Do you want to talk about what that was?
Sure. This isn't probably a popular, even wise thing to talk about, but when I registered to vote for the first time as a freshman at the University of Florida, I registered as a Republican. And it'd be easy to say I did that because that's what my parents were, but the real reason is because I grew up listening to talk radio, and one of the things that I listened to all the time was Rush Limbaugh. And I didn't know any better. I just that was the only thing on. There was no other type of talk radio out there. It was that or sports. And we're driving around with my dad in his truck, working job site to job site. That's what we listened to. I was the 12-year-old kid with a subscription to Newsweek, whereas everybody else had whatever Tiger Beat or something that they were reading. And I was very into what was going on in the world. I just thought that was the most interesting thing. And I thought I was wise because of the amount of knowledge I had gained from listening to talk radio. And then I went to college and I realized it was all bullshit. And that was a really big slap in the face for me. The idea that, I'm being educated, getting a very typical liberal arts education, but also working in journalism as an undergrad and listening to some more and having access to more. And for the first time, hearing things like National Public Radio, reading things like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and being able to have access to stuff that I never had access to before. And when that happened, that was a real slap in the face for me. That was a sort of a deprogramming moment. My 4 years at Florida were very much like being deprogrammed from a cult. And it really threw me for a loop. And so I avoided politics after that. I just stayed away from it altogether. And then, I just poured myself into nonprofit work and doing whatever I could to try to help other people. And it's a living. I have 4 kids. It pays the bills. It's a good job. I enjoy doing it. I've never felt like it was a calling. I just had the opportunity and I tried to do the best I could with it. And I'm still trying to do that. But then President Trump gave a speech in Mobile, Alabama in late 2015. And I was at a restaurant and I was watching it off the distance, kind of seeing behind. And I was shocked at the crowd size, because late 2015, he was still kind of a joke with the party. There's no way it's going to be Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or Chris Christie. And that's what everybody was thinking. And I went over to the bar and asked him to turn it up, and I started listening. And I started getting queasy, not because of what he was saying, but because 25 years ago, I was a part of that. And I was embarrassed to be a part of that. And that really kind of, if the going to college was a slap in the face, hearing Donald Trump talk out loud to large crowds was a punch in the stomach. And it made me sick to my stomach for weeks. And I had never gone and changed my party registration. Wasn't something that was important to me. I didn't really think about it too much. I was almost avoiding it. And I happen to know the former supervisor of elections here in Florida, Bill Cowles, from just previous work I've done. And I called him and I said, what does it mean to change my registration? I can't be a Republican. I'm embarrassed. This is crazy. He's like, just come on down. And so Bill Cowles actually did the form with me. It was kind of strange to have the supervisor themselves. And I registered as a Democrat and felt kind of odd about it because I hadn't been active in the party. But then a friend of mine named Anna Escamani, who was on an advisory board with me. I knew she had really strong feelings about her policy and politics. So she and I went to breakfast, and I asked her, I mean, she's 15 years younger than me, but here I am asking her, what are your politics? And I didn't even know she remembered this story until she repeated it back at an event we did recently. And I wasn't asking her like, convince me of this or convince me of that. I just said, tell me about your politics, because I want to know, I want to hear. And she had some really, really great insight that helped me to sort of frame my mind. And then she asked me questions, and she kept peppering me with, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about abortion? What do you think about the environment? What do you think about defense spending? What do you think about a home rule? I mean, she was just peppering me with questions. It was great. And at the end of it, she goes, Eric, I think you might be more progressive than I am. And that's saying something. And I laughed at it at the time, but in some ways she was right. And then my friend Chris King decided he was going to run for governor. And we had lunch at the exact same restaurant a couple weeks later. And he said, Eric, I'm thinking about running for governor. And I was like, whoa, wow, okay. And he goes, I'd love for you to come down to the state Democratic Party convention, Leadership Blue. And I'm renting a bus. I'm taking a bunch of people down. I was like, okay. So this was the first time I'd gone to any real party function. And this is, I think, roughly 2016, 2017. And I got down there, and I'm going to these seminars, and I'm sitting next to Bill Nelson, the senator, and his wife. I'm sitting next to, Gwen Graham, the daughter of the late governor and senator. And we're just listening to things, one seminar on the LGBTQ plus community, one other on the environment, another on Everglades restoration, and just at a normal conference. And I'm learning a ton, just a one-day thing. And I get back on the bus because another friend of mine who was there, and we have similar backgrounds. He's like, what'd you think? And I said, it felt really normal. It felt really comfortable. And that's when I started getting active, not because I wanted to run, but because I wanted to help. I started going to party functions, going to holiday parties, helping out where I could, and not really thinking that it was going to lead to anything, not really thinking that it was going to amount to more, because I have a really big, challenging job, and I'm pretty focused on that. And I have 4 children, and it's hard just managing those things. But I kept doing it and kept showing up and doing it. And then Donald Trump gets elected, and then he loses election. And then there's the insurrection and on January 6th, and things just keep, getting worse and worse. And then he talks about injecting bleach, into your veins for COVID. And I'm just like, this can't get worse. This is crazy. So the immorality of all of it really drove me to starting to help campaign for others and talking about it for others and going and being the hype man for somebody running for office as often as I could. And then people started asking me, have you ever thought about doing this? And I'm like, not really, no. And I just changed the subject. And it's kind of been, that's the path, which I don't know if that's a regular thing that people do, or if my path is unique, or if it's very common. I have no idea. But, I came to it my own way. And I feel really good and very confident about speaking of the things I speak to now. But it wasn't always that way. It's taken a lot of practice. Not that I'm practicing the words, but it's taken a lot of practice for building the confidence to not just believe in something, but to be able to speak about it out loud, and to be able to let people ask you questions about it and listen to them, and be willing to be malleable in your own opinion based on a logical argument, which is a really hard thing to do no matter what party you're in, because you feel like, I got to be steadfast in my opinion. I can change my mind. If you give me a good convincing argument, yeah, I'll listen to it. I may change my mind, but I may also tell you that no, I don't. And I'll tell you why. And I've had a lot of practice now with people asking me my opinion, particularly in the media, and putting it out there for the world to hear. And for a while, I was scared to go down into the driveway and pick up the paper and see what I'd been quoted as saying, because I might get fired for some of these opinions about the tourism industry or about homelessness. And over time, you start getting less and less worried about that. And now I don't even read the stuff where people quote me, because I don't need to. I know what I said. And I appreciate the journalists in this community. They've been really, really kind to me. But I've gotten to this place now where I feel incredibly blessed to have a voice. The idea that anybody would listen to me at all for more than a few seconds, that I might have any influence on anybody else's opinion on things, is the greatest blessing in my life. I mean, I can't believe that there are people out there who were actually interested in anything that I think or say. And what that drives me to most is a greater interest in what others have to say too. And I feel really, really fortunate to have that. And if I don't do anything else in this life, just having had a voice for this last 10 years or so has been really, really great.
Well, the only thing better is just getting a policy across the finish line. There's nothing sweeter than that, especially when you know that it could really impact someone's quality of life in a good way.
Yeah.
I think that's been my white rabbit now that I did jump into politics. Getting to run campaigns to me is getting to run educators to the community, basically spokespeople for the issues that I care about. There is a little sense of competitiveness because you want to fight back against these corporate entities that get to have a stronger and louder seat at the table than everyday people. So there is that sense of like wanting to own them a little bit from me. But for the most part, when you are able to actually get a piece of policy over the finish line, whether it's something small like increasing, the fertilizer ordinance for restricting fertilizer usage in river basins, or optimizing our tree ordinance and making it even better, or even just something small like getting a sidewalk put in. I see it from the lens of local, but when you get up there, you're going to have an opportunity to let your voice and your message also inform policy. And some folks, they get really like, oh, well, Anna Eskamani never does anything because she can't get a bill passed. Well, they don't really point at the fact that Republicans are refusing to negotiate.
Right.
And sometimes a messaging bill can be even more important than a bill that just gets over the finish line that really doesn't do much to help people. I think something that I really admire from Representative Eskamani is that even if she knows a bill is going to die, if it has the meat on the bones of like something real that we could do, and she really fights to bring strong messaging around it, it shows people this is what you deserve. This is what you could have. Yeah. And that's why she flipped a Republican district, because I really refuse to believe that the rhetoric that Trump says that he speaks is broadly accepted on the Republican side. I know a lot of conservative Republicans that one or two issues we might disagree on, but when it comes to conservation, when it comes to regulating big corporations that are squeezing our labor force, breaking up unions, destroying our environment, exploiting people, we're on the same page 9 conversations out of 10. I think the affordability crisis and the lack of the fact that Biden was not a strong messenger whatsoever really hurt us and made people lead to Trump. But I think if we had viable options and that the Republican Party didn't have such a lock on their party to the point where now if someone were to break from their mafia, hierarchy, they get exiled and they're just forcing their party more and more right. We, on the other hand, on the Democratic side, we're kind of stumbling all over each other, just trying to get a strong voice and a strong message, because I don't think every person that seeks office has a heart for service to the point where they make those quality of life and affordability issues front row and center. And, something I love about you is that even though you have to raise money in order to see your mission come to fruition through your nonprofit work, you're not afraid to say, hey, corporation, you could be doing better. Hey, corporation, you could be paying livable wages. Hey, corporation, you could be, maybe not spending millions of dollars lobbying, for our tourism development tax to just go into a bucket that's just going to subsidize your bottom line. You're not afraid to speak out, even though you're rubbing shoulders with a lot of people in a similar community that might not want the tourism industry to change, and you're unapologetic about it, which makes you genuine and able to actually have conversations. Once you get into a position of power where that heart can inform policy, you're going to be able to show Democrats and Republicans in your district what they deserve.
Well, I appreciate you, and you're too kind. I would go back to something you said earlier about getting policy, implemented. You've been a part of a couple of interesting policy initiatives recently, and in the rural boundary that you and Kelly Semrad and Emily Bonilla and others who push so hard. I don't know that most people really understand the enormity of having an urban service boundary in a community. It's not the kind of thing that most people would study unless you studied land planning in college, and I happen to, and so I know a little bit about the benefit of that. And we look at some communities that are growing vertically, say like New York, that are bordered by the East River and the Hudson River. And then we look at other communities like Atlanta that are just sprawling out, right? And I think we all know and understand that communities that are growing vertically are going to be healthier in the long run for its residents. But at the same time, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to live in a community like that. Well, I think a couple million New Yorkers would disagree, but who am I? Establishing a rural boundary for Orange County, even as frankly as small as it is, because West Orange County, it's barely covering the part of West Orange County that's rural. It's incredibly important because it's like establishing that we have the East River and the Hudson River on the east-west side of the county. And we're forcing ourselves into a place where we grow vertically, not just because it's the trendy thing to do. It's because right now it makes it completely unaffordable for people to travel to and from their jobs when they have to travel 60, 70, 80 miles from where they live to get to a decent paying job. And the more we build and promote infill development, the more we create better transportation opportunities through public transit, the less expensive we make for most of the community to live in that area. And I think those things can be critically important. Split oak. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. You're the advocate on split oak forest in the community. Everybody knows this, but I hadn't visited split oak forest specifically. I'd just been to Moss Park until just 2 days ago. And, specifically because I knew I was coming to visit you today, did the whole loop, and it doesn't disappoint. You're right. It's an incredible place. It is an incredible natural wonder. The split oak itself is pretty cool, but it's the whole of the wetlands and the scrub area and the wildlife, the birds and the deer and the boar and all the things that are out there. And it's important that we preserve these things, not just because it's the trendy thing to do and it sounds cool in a pamphlet, because you don't get to bring these back. I mean, like the old song, you pave paradise, by put up a parking lot. I think that's legitimately what's happening way too often in Florida. And we don't get this, we don't get a second chance at these things. Once we start developing this land, it's gone forever in its pristine state. And it's been this way for hundreds of thousands of years. And yeah, people have to live somewhere, but we can make better, wiser decisions. Because it goes back to what we talked about before. Is this benefiting the community as a whole? Or is it benefiting a single builder developer and their livelihood? And I don't discount their livelihood. My parents build homes for a living, have my entire life. So they're technically developers over in the Tampa Bay area. But they're building 2 or 3 individual homes a year. It's a different type of thing. But I think that, I respect their need to provide for their own families. I do. But we don't live in a society where everything is independent. Everything impacts the other thing. And that's the role of government, is to say, okay, yeah, we want you to benefit, but we also want your neighbor to benefit, and we want your neighbor's neighbor to benefit. And we need to find a way to make all of this somehow equally beneficial for people as best we can without turning it into a communist society. I think there's a balance to be had. And right now we are so far out of balance that the wealth gap has started to push us towards fascism. That's how bad it is. And, it'd be the same as if we were trying to create wealth equality and pulling wealth from people to give it and distribute it to other people. That's pushing us more towards communism and socialism. But the other extreme is true too. And I think the Republicans who are all in on these policies and tax cuts that are really, frankly, only benefiting a small percentage of our country, they really have to think about the long term. Where is this headed? And people, they knock things like the Antifa. Well, Antifa, it's crazy to me. Like, everybody in America should be anti-fascist.
Right.
We fought 2 world wars, the second of which was entirely about fascism, at least on the European front. And I mean, that should be just sort of a non-debatable issue. Of course, we're anti-fascist. We're all anti-fascist. If you're against anti-fascism, what does that mean? That means you're for fascism. And I think that, 15 years ago, I would have thought that's a crazy conversation to have. I mean, that's way extreme. But you start following things that are happening on a daily basis in the country right now. And the ideological shift that's coming out of Washington seems to have found ground zero here in Tallahassee, that these things start to get kind of scary. And so getting policy approved is a big deal. But you mentioned Anna and her sort of fighting back against, pushing back on the ocean. The Florida House and Senate, we have in the Florida House, it's an 87-33 Republican advantage. It's a massive advantage for Republicans. But the thing about Anna is that she gets up on every single issue coming in front of the House, and she addresses it. And she addresses it intelligently and effectively, and makes everybody listening think twice before they make a decision on how to vote.
Exactly.
The problem is not everybody's listening. And I think that if we had the other 32 Democrats in the Florida House pushing at the same level that she is, I think we'd be pushing back some legislation that otherwise, wouldn't be getting attention. And I think that I aspire to do what Anna's doing by being as best I can, not necessarily the smartest person in the room. I would never want to be that person, but the most informed, the most educated that I can be, and be willing to speak about it in a way that is beneficial, not just to the people who voted for me, but to everybody in the community. And sure, getting policy passed would be even better. But right now, that's not the environment we live in. And the best we can do is basically be the resistance. And, I'm not talking about forming the rebel alliance, but there are times when it starts to feel like that's what's coming. And there are times when you start feeling like, okay, who's going to start? Because this is starting to get a little scary for me. And you're right in there with it. I mean, you're right in the middle of all this, right with me and everybody else.
And I'm going to get even deeper.
Yeah.
2026 is the year where it's like, I told my husband, let's take all of our vacations now, because 2026, I'm not leaving the computer.
And it doesn't feel like we're in the minority, but I don't feel lonely. I feel like there's a lot of support around us. And I'm getting the sense in doing this campaign that I have a lot of people who I know are Republicans who have donated to the campaign, who have called me about it. And not a small number. I mean, significant, like a third or more of my donors. And most of them are over age 65. And so their jobs don't count on this type of rhetoric any longer. And they're not comfortable seeing what they're seeing. And some of these people are hardcore, lifelong Republicans who are so worried about what they see on the news every day that they are searching for any possible answer they can find. And for whatever reason, a handful of the things I'm saying make sense to them. And they feel like, okay, we can trust him and we can trust some other people as well. And we really want to get behind them because we feel like we need somebody to stand in the way of the freight train. And otherwise, we're all getting run over at some point.
Exactly. I mean, I want to just dive into a little bit when you said that if all 33 Democrats pushed as hard, we would be in a different place. I see it as also the follow through, right? Because I see some Dems that you might see them at least take a photo or two up in Tallahassee, but you don't see them like breaking down the bills on like a weekly live on Facebook, or you don't see them like constantly posting all of the updates on said issue. I call it the Annaverse because I feel like she's an example of all the ways that she's physically and digitally accessible to people all across the state, not just in her district. And that's why she's the greatest threat, because she is pushing back on every single bill in a articulate way that helps people understand what the threat level of the bill. Because otherwise, what would they get away with if there wasn't someone there combing through every line and pointing at it and saying, this is going to hurt people this way. This is going to hurt people this way. She's more of a threat because she's chipping away at their fake narrative. And then the follow through of educating people. And then during COVID, something that I saw was her constituent services. When every other representative wasn't answering the phones, wasn't helping people navigate the unemployment system, she went above and beyond in making sure her constituent services, even for those not in the district, she never turned anyone away.
Right.
And that made people love her and support her that would otherwise probably just fall blind to like the regime that's pushing terrible bills. They wouldn't know how they're being harmed, or how the money is influencing those bills, or how the lobbyists are directly handing the legislators those bills. She's there to spotlight it. So when people say she's not effective because she didn't get a policy passed or what have you, she's set up to fail on that front, frankly, right now. But every other piece of power that she has, that's my biggest frustration with a lot of Democrats, is coming from the nonprofit space and being like the chief operating officer, where I have to be dressed up and like going to a fundraiser. But before I do that, I'm cleaning toilets and sweeping in the office because I have interns bringing dirt in the door. You know what I mean? I'm not afraid to do everything and anything that it takes. And sometimes right now, some of the Dems that have been in office for years and years who have a platform, they're not like, we want people to be a leader right now. Make us feel taken care of. I'm seeing raids. I'm seeing children being hunted down outside of their school and helicopters flying over schools. I'm seeing, entire labor forces being impacted by these raids. I'm seeing and you have seen this so much more intricately than I have, but I'm seeing senior citizens who were already skipping meals over the weekends in order to make ends meet, are now at risk of losing benefits and their healthcare premiums doubling in a way where it's like an atomic bomb is about to go off of our social network, our social net that's supposed to be catching people right now. Mm-hmm. And yet I don't see people using every single inch of their platform to leverage it to spotlight what is going on. And being that you're from the nonprofit world, I mean, I can only imagine the stories that you see that are so easily ignored because we don't have every single Democrat highlighting it and speaking to it, and Republicans should be doing the same thing. But I was just cleaning hotel rooms for disabled veterans at State of Hope, which is in a hotel right here around the corner from me. There are veterans sleeping outside going through their dumpster right now. They have some folks who literally have no family, who are immobile, who cannot clean themselves, who are living in just absolute filth. And it's a hotel reaching out to us, hey, can you volunteer to help us clean and support this person regularly because they have absolutely no one. And when I ask, what is the state doing? Where are it just feels like there's never enough money, resources, time. But then I'm seeing huge subsidies for industries that have record profits. Mm-hmm. And I just don't understand why everyone isn't acting like it's an emergency right now.
One of the reasons, it's not necessarily the main reason, but it's an important one, is you got to remember that being in the Florida House, you get compensated because it's a job, but you get paid about $29,800 a year. And so, you're literally working for less than minimum wage. Mm-hmm. And it used to be that these were really considered part-time jobs. I mean, many states, including Florida, didn't even meet every year. They met every other year. And they met during the dead of the winter when you didn't have to tend to your crops. And that's just how this was developed. The challenge is for not just Democrats, but Republicans too, is they have to pay the rent. Mm-hmm. And unless they are independently wealthy to start, which most of them aren't, or unless they have a spouse that is able to support them, which some of them do, they have to have other jobs. And almost every elected Democrat that I know in the Central Florida delegation has another full-time job. And so the idea of trying to stay on top of every single issue, stay on top of reading about it, understanding it, talking to other people about it to get a place where you feel like you understand enough to make your own point of view, that can be incredibly taxing on a lot of people. But that's the job right now. And that's show business. If you can't do it, you need to get out.
Right.
And should it be that way? Absolutely not. But that's how it is right now. And I think that if you aren't able to get up, you don't necessarily have to fight on every single issue coming in front of the House or the Senate, but you need to be ready to talk about most of them very quickly. And that's a very, very heavy lift. That's a hard thing for anybody to do. The fact that Anna is doing it really is just testament to what I've said all along, that she's the most impressive person I've ever met in real life. But you also have some other people that are doing that as well. Maxwell Frost is incredibly well spoken on a litany of topics. You drop something in front of him, I would put all kinds of money. You really be hard pressed to find a topic he couldn't speak to about intelligently. Carlos Guillermo-Smith, the same way. Carlos has a couple of key issues that he focuses on really, really fiercely, and he's incredibly knowledgeable about it. But honestly, at the end of the day, if you put him in on a debate stage with somebody else, I wouldn't want to debate him. He's tough. And he does it with a smile on his face that is hard to beat. So we've got some pretty powerful Democrats in the community. Even Kelly. I mean, look at what Kelly's been able to do. Kelly's had she's not even a full year into the job, and she's had a couple of votes already that potentially could have gotten her removed from office because she did the right thing, the principled thing, as opposed to what people might have just thought was okay for her to do, or to keep her in office to make sure she votes another day. And I think that speaking up on these issues is incredibly important. But before you can even get to that, you have to be ready to lose your job. Because if you're doing this as a career path, you need to get out of the business. This is not a career path. This is a volunteer opportunity to help lead in your community. No different than the PTA or the homeowners association or anything else. It's a volunteer role. Yes, you get compensated for it, but you don't get compensated enough to make this your livelihood. And it really shouldn't be. It's never intended to be. And that's part of why we have term limits. But we have to have people who are willing to make votes based on principled decisions, based on knowledge, based on collection of facts and data, even if it's going to get them voted out of office. Because you're not supposed to just lend your vote. You're supposed to lend your judgment. And people who say, well, this is how my constituents wanted me to vote, that drives me crazier than just about anything, because that is not how the American Republic was set up. You're supposed to offer your judgment, because not everybody can know the intricacies of a nuclear arms treaty, and they shouldn't be expected to. Not everybody can understand the intricacies of poverty in the community and why food aid assistance is so critical at certain times of people's growth and development. You're not going to understand that. That's why we hire people by voting them in that can bring wisdom across a multitude of areas. And we look for people who are impressive because that's what's required. Just because you can speak about something doesn't mean you understand it. We've seen plenty of people who can talk a good talk, but don't walk the walk. But right now, we've got a really strong team of people in Central Florida that can do both. They can walk it and they can talk it, and they're incredibly impressive. I mean, Maxwell's being sent all over the United States to campaign for multiple issues because he's so well spoken that the Democratic Party is sending him around to make the point that others just aren't capable of making in other states that he's able to do here. He's an incredibly powerful force. I would not be surprised if you didn't in the future see Maxwell on a national ticket as the VP candidate for somebody. I literally would not be surprised if you see that. I think that you're going to see Anna in the mayor's role here in the city of Orlando, and that's going to be a sea change in how things work here. I think you probably see somebody like Carlos in the county mayor role one day. If he's got a long time to go in the Senate, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Florida Senate. I mean, he's 1 year in the Senate and he was already knocking them down. I mean, it was so great. And his social media was so fun to watch. And he wasn't doing any editing. He's just showing him what he's saying and showing what the person across from him is saying. And so that we have some really impressive folks, and they inspire me phenomenally. If it weren't for Anna, right, and it weren't for Carlos, I don't think I'd be doing this. Not because they've done anything for me or said anything to me. They inspire me. They really do. And they're both younger than me. And so I'm like, how are you accomplishing all that? And Maxwell is not even in his 30s yet. And he's already one of the most impressive people I've ever met. So we got some game. We've got some heavy hitters just right here in Orange County.
It's just the culture of not only campaigning, but serving, that I think we have a lucky opportunity to have elected officials locally who are leading by example of that. Just the ability to have incredible constituent services, incredible digital organizing and social media. You know, Anna knocks all year, every year, even before she decided to run for the city, on doors just to make sure that people have access to resources. It's just a different model that I think people are going to slowly grow to expect. So, you know, with everything that's happening with Trump and with this far right, you know, move and push on the Republican Party side, I think they're losing people. I think there are a lot of moderate Republicans that are looking for real leadership and real answers to healthcare, to, you know, equitable jobs and quality of life, and to the environment, to clean drinking water, to make sure that their water's not giving their spouses cancer. There's a lot of people who are starting to reject this extremism. I think that they were misled. I think a lot of Christians were misled. I think a lot of folks of faith were misled because they saw, I don't know why the Dems have a terrible brand when it comes to their positions on faith, and why people gravitate towards a Republican that doesn't walk the walk. Like, if you walk the walk of God, you're literally like washing someone's feet. You know, you're feeding them when you have just one piece of bread left. You know, it's the overwhelming drive to serve is God's love. And yet they're attracted to a party that says nothing but rhetoric that divides. It's very harsh language. Like when you said that you were embarrassed when you heard Trump speak and you changed your party, what was it that was being said specifically that was a pushing away point for you?
I mean, the first thing was the first thing he started saying, which was demonizing Mexican immigrants and, you know, speaking of them as rapists and criminals, and knowing that that's a good way to get a gig. You know, demonizing a certain group of people. We've been doing it in politics long before there was even an America, and this is something that goes back to ancient times. You know, demonize this one group of people to get ahead. But when you do it so blatantly and so dishonestly, it's really a lot of the immoral and dishonest actions that I feel that my friends, my neighbors who lean towards the Republican Party are finding ways to excuse behavior that they would never accept from their own family, ever. And they would never accept in their own workplace, ever. But they're finding ways to excuse it. And what I try to do often is when I have an opportunity to speak to someone who I know feels very strongly about the Republican Party or about President Trump or about Governor DeSantis, I respect their feelings. I do. And I ask them, tell me what you believe the Republican Party or President Trump or Governor DeSantis has done for you, or your representative, Susan Placencia or Erica Booth or Senator Jason Broder. I mean, tell me what they have done for you that has improved your life or the lives of your children and grandchildren. And they may very well have done things, and I'm just genuinely interested in hearing it. But that's not how they respond. What they respond with is, let's go Brandon. You know, it becomes this whole, we want to talk about how bad Joe Biden is and how terrible Kamala Harris would have been and how terrible the Democratic Party really is for the future of the country, instead of talking about the things that we're for. You know, so I have to do the same thing. If that's the barometer by which I operate, I have to be able to kind of be able to do the same, right? And what I want to see is a community here that is encouraging home rule, that is encouraging local governments at the municipal and county level to take responsibility for their own actions, to be able to save money and spend it wisely, to be able to, have law enforcement and fire rescue, which are really the core responsibilities for most local governments, that are efficient, but also where those individuals are well paid for long-term career and benefits, where there's a career path that you can stay in law enforcement, you can stay in fire rescue, and you can do it safely, and you can do it for your entire career. And that's not what's being proposed now by the Republican Party. They'll say we're all about law and order, but when it comes down to it, in terms of actually making the dedicated funding towards supporting those things, it's just not there. And for example, right now in the Orlando Police Department, not Orange County, just the city of Orlando Police Department, 60% of their entire workforce lives outside of Orange County. Mm-hmm. Now, a few of them will say, well, I don't really want to live in Orange County. I want to live in Lake County because it's just more my style. Okay, that's fine. But when it's 60%, that's an affordability issue. And we're not putting together policies that are going to help build affordable apartments for people in the long run. Right now, we have one of the highest percentages of homeowners renting of any city in the United States. Almost half of every household in our community is renting. That is usually most of the rest of the country, it's a third. For us, it's half. And when you see that, it becomes disturbing such that you think, what are we doing about it?
Right.
Like what are the Republicans doing about it? What are the Democrats doing about it? And what we're doing about it is we passed a long-term comprehensive plan called Vision 2050, right? It worked on it for 8 years. It started with a Republican mayor, Teresa Jacobs. This was a very well-respected bipartisan initiative. And it was going to push us towards becoming one of the most progressive, positive, constructive, and creative communities in the country in terms of long-term growth. There was nothing about it that was so wildly, pull it out of your ass radical that anybody should have any problem with it. But because a couple of key developers who had a lot of money decided that they didn't like this, they got the Senate to pass a bill and the House to pass it as well, and the governor to sign it, that eliminated the things like the rural boundary, eliminated things like Vision 2050, eliminated Orange Code. And those are the things that we're trying to build to improve the community. I'm trying to protect the money that goes into our public schools. But right now, we have a state government that is willing to let charter schools go in and take space that is unoccupied because maybe the school isn't at its full capacity right now. All right, maybe that's fine because charter schools aren't supposed to have any type of religious affiliation. But we are less than a year away from the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on a case out of Oklahoma that would allow, if they vote a certain way on it, private religious charter schools. And that means now you have religious education in public schools as a precedent. And so now, it doesn't take too many episodes of Handmaid's Tale to kind of see the direction we're going towards this theocracy.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're trying to protect against that. And so the establishment is moving one way, and some of us are pushing back on it by saying, this is going in a dangerous direction and you got to slow down with this. Mm-hmm. Because just because your donors, your billionaire Christian nationalist donors are forcing you into these positions and they sound like they know what they're talking about, you better know what you're talking about first, because we didn't vote you in just for you to follow the lead of some major donor. And that's exactly what's happening. Not in a fanciful, crazy way, but I've been on the other side of this where I've had to cast votes on things like the Planning and Zoning Commission, where you have people of influence, major corporations, mm-hmm. who are trying to call you and talk to you about why this is good and this is bad. Nobody's trying to bribe me. Nobody's trying to do anything that's unethical, but they are powerful.
Yes.
And I want to be able to keep my job and do well in my job. I don't want to really upset this major corporation that's a major tourism leader in the community, because they might stop giving to my organization. But the moment you start thinking that way, you've lost.
Right.
If you are taking a vote because the alternative is you lose your job and the governor might put somebody else in your place. You should not have been in that job in the first place. And I love Mayor Demings. I'm a huge fan of Mayor Demings. When he was sheriff, when he was police chief, I just have been a fan. I really am. He's a good man. But I disagreed with the decision that he made, and that frankly, Kelly and Nicole were the only ones brave enough to stand up against it. And see, his rationale was, I don't agree with this, but I'm going to vote for it because if I'm removed from office, he's just going to put somebody else in my place who's more conservative. That is why you were put in office to begin with, is to stand firm on your own convictions. Now, if he was a conservative, right, and he voted his convictions in that direction, I would be all for that. But he's not, and he's voting as a conservative because he's afraid of the conservatives. I mean, it's not. I mean, gosh, to say that Mayor Demings is afraid of anything is kind of silly, because the man has carried a weapon most of his life as a profession. But he's not alone. He's not the only one. The other, 5 members of the county commission went right along with him. I mean,
it's lawyers, it's huge companies that are on the verge of a merger, that are scared of losing their business deal. I mean, we can go on and on and on to all of the different entities who have kind of bowed down to what they know in their hearts and in their minds is a push in a direction that's not American. And it's on all of us to wrap resources and time around the people that will stand strong in their convictions. I mean, it comes with great risks. I try to balance my super liberal and progressive friends that want to see every single candidate be like AOC. And I try to explain that, like, harm reduction first. Voting for someone who is going to be the lesser of two evils should always be the way. But we can't just expect every single candidate and elected official to be as outspoken. The only way we can get that is if we wrap resources and time around them. Like every time Commissioner Sumrad is about to do something that could basically, coerce the governor to remove her, she has a big press conference and people show up. Yeah. People answer the phone. They answer the call to show that they're going to speak in solidarity with whatever it is she's fighting for. And if we didn't have that, we would be nothing. She would just be someone worth, flicking away. But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The reason why she's able to mobilize people is because she has an effective way of communicating. Yeah. A lot of Dems, and frankly, tons of Republicans, they don't use every piece of their platform that they're given to prove that they're fighting for people. And then what happens is, I think people, they want more, they expect more, but they just don't feel like politics is a genuine place where they're going to get that.
Yeah, and you mentioned constituent services earlier, and I think this is a underutilized portion of elected officials' platforms and responsibilities. When you're in this role and you feel like, I want to be more outspoken, I want to stand up and speak about the things that I want to speak about. A good place to do that, to start doing that, is by just speaking one at a time to your own constituents. There seems to be tons of opportunity to do so right now. People are struggling with things like food stamps, SNAP benefits, struggling with their housing. They're being evicted. We're up to 17,000 evictions in Orange County this year. We're breaking records every single year. And there's people calling about, I don't have access to food, or I don't have access to get on the bus. I can't afford a bus pass, or my power is about to be turned off. And I think that for some elected leaders, they feel like that's not really what I was elected to do. I was elected to go and help influence policy. And that's true. But the state of Florida allows you a constituent services budget for a reason. And I think it's really on us to use it. And when you start doing that and you start listening to the problems, you get overwhelmed really fast because you think, I don't have solutions for all these. But then it puts you in a position that you have to find the solutions. You have to know what nonprofits out there have resources, what other government agencies have resources, what are the laws that around this. Maybe you could advise them about what their rights are in terms of eviction. When you lean into constituent services, you're really truly leaning into the job. And I think that's where you start to gain your own passion, and you start to realize I'm not just speaking up for people, coming from my belief. I'm not just speaking up for the beliefs coming from my heart. I'm actually speaking for the people that I was on the phone with yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. I'm speaking up for the people whose tent that they're living in, I just helped unzip and sit it and talk with them for a few minutes. I'm representing the guy who is on kidney dialysis 3 times a day and can't afford it, and is living in his car close to the dialysis place because he can't do anything else because he can barely walk to get there. You start understanding the plight of some of these people. It's not other people. It's a significant measurable percentage of the community. There is not a single district in Florida where at least 40% of the population is living at 200% of the U.S. poverty level or below. Let me put it another way. In almost every district in the state, half of your constituents are struggling to make ends meet. Half. So we're not talking about some subset, strange minority category. We're talking about at least half of your constituency. And if you're not learning what they're struggling with every day, then the only reason I could think of is because you've been through it yourself and you don't need to learn any more about it. But even if that were the case, I still think it's worth hearing about it, listening to it. It's painful. It's emotionally draining. Believe me, I do this every day, and it's hard to keep up with. But that's how you start. That's where it starts. Listening to. Some people have come to this other ways. I come to it by listening to people who have been struggling with poverty or homelessness. But there's some who've come to it by listening to people who struggled because of issues of reproductive rights and heard some horror stories. Not just a couple of times, hundreds of times. There are people they've come about it by being activists within the LGBTQ community, and not just hearing the positive stories about coming out and being supported, but hearing the horror stories about lack of access to medications, about lack of access to to important care, to being fired from a job because you were discriminated against because you were gay. I mean, there's all kinds of stories that people have heard from. There's also people who've experienced gun violence, and they have firsthand knowledge of it, such that this is driving them forward. And that's what I usually look for when I'm voting, is what is that person's background and experience? I don't care if they're wealthy or not. They may have come from extreme wealth, but if they've found a way to insert themselves into the daily lives of the people they're representing, if they found a way to sort of get ingrained into the community in some way, I respect that. It doesn't have to be the entire community, but if you really lean in on one thing, it could be public transit, it could be road construction, it could be anything, but you really lean in on like one thing, you become an expert, it makes it a far sight more likely that you're going to be able to become an expert on other things too. But if you're sort of coasting through and you're trying to be moderately knowledgeable about a lot of things, it's just not enough. It's not enough. And right now, we're in an exciting time to be alive, but we're also in a dangerous time that the decisions we make today are going to impact my grandchildren's lives, without a doubt. 100%. And so you got to have the best of the best in these people in these positions, and you got to have people you can trust that are going to do the right thing, even if it's the thing that you don't agree with. They're going to make the right decision, because it's so important right now. And I'm so proud of the people that are going up there and doing that in Tallahassee. We got some really great people on the county commission and the Orlando City Council. They're fantastic people. I mean, these are wonderful, wonderful people that are really trying hard, and I respect the hell out of them.
Yeah, I definitely hear everything that you're saying. One thing that I thought about is I was driven into this work through seeing unhealthy parts of our environment get worse and feeling like they don't have a voice. When I say they, the various species that, because of sprawl are getting sicker and they can't really go anywhere. So they're bringing their diseases back to their, habitat and making other animals sicker. And the rates of, roadkill and just the fact that we're in a subtropical climate. And when I stand outside of my home, at night, I barely see any moths or any insects. around my lights. And that's really, really a sign that the earth is suffering and that we're going to go down with it if we keep going down this trajectory. When I see someone who's struggling in poverty on the side of the road, that you can tell they've been under the sun and just fighting to find a meal, and probably very parched and probably has so many other adverse health impacts. You feel this sense of like pain when you look into their eyes. I feel that all the time for nature. And sometimes I think people have a blindness to nature because, you're balancing everything that's going on right now. And frankly, there's a blindness to folks who are unhoused. People just slowly stop noticing. Mm-hmm. I think my drive to service and to working in politics is I want to reverse that. I love the idea of campaigns being like profit, philosophers, not prophets, philosophers who go around and speak to different types of themes and helps educate various communities of history. And I think right now we're in this culture where everyone is just looking at their phones and getting information based on how the algorithm targets you. Mm-hmm. And yet, if we push the bounds on that, I can see you going to a Republican meeting and speaking and having everyone in that room light up in a way where they're going to want to support you. If they didn't know that you were a Dem and they actually let you in the room, I think you would bring all of those people closer to understanding your why and what you're fighting for through a campaign. And that's why campaigning to me is the best way we can change the world for our grandkids, is that these are folks that are going to break through that phone culture and knock on doors and tell people, I'm here to listen. I want to learn. And frankly, I want to do something about it. Mm-hmm. to make people feel a sense of hope. I mean, out in like Bithlo and Christmas, out there, folks feel so disconnected from politics. They don't feel like anyone's really representing them. And frankly, deep in the woods where there's tent cities, those folks are left on their own. And to be a voice for them, to be able to be literally, you go into the woods and you physically sit down in a tent with someone and you feed them and you bring them resources. That should be what we're all striving to see in our elected officials.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody can do the things that, that I get to do every day. And even I didn't get to do these things. It took a while to get to the place where I was even qualified, to do some of that. But I think that we have opportunities all the time to ask questions of something. I am not anti-tourism, right? I'm not anti-convention center or anything like those. I think tourism industry is great. The convention center is great. My problem is making decisions about how we invest in these things without objective, independent, third-party qualified data mm-hmm. that will tell us, when you see this happen across a lot of different areas, whether it's housing or criminal justice or investing in certain industries and things like that, there seems to be a lot of this sort of instinctive, this is what we should do. I don't need to look at the data. I'm like, good Lord, why in this age of information would you not want to look at the data to help you make a good decision? And I've seen this now firsthand, particularly when we talked about the tourist development tax 2 years ago with the task force. My issue wasn't that I was opposed to any of the projects. My issue was there are a lot of good projects. Can we find an objective way to compare them that isn't set up by the tourism industry itself, but is set up by an out-of-state economist who can tell us what the return on investment for pumping $600 million into the Citrus Bowl or $20 million into the Wells Built Museum, and which one's going to have the best return on investment? And we weren't willing to do that. Mm-hmm. When I asked those questions and asked for us to have some type of accountability there, I got pushback and say, well, but that's what the comptroller already does. And I was like, no, it's not. He's an accountant. He's a good accountant. And he tells us if we have the money to spend, not how we should spend the money and where is it best. If we turned around and said, the best way to spend money is putting a gazebo in the town square because it's going to help promote weddings at the town square, that's fine. Let's do it. But if we're deciding, let's build something that's the size of 1,000 gazebos, and we're comparing that to the possibility of improving the roads or maybe buying a couple of extra buses, I'm not just going to instinctively say, well, I like the buses. I want to know the numbers. I want to know the facts.
The return.
That's right.
On the investment.
Why people are, afraid to look at these things. For a while, it was really baffling to me. But you just follow the money. And it's because, well, I don't want to be the guy who questions the tourism industry. Mm-hmm. And, as the person in the community or as a person in the community that questions the tourism industry, I get it. It's not a pleasant place to be. I'm not the most popular guy at the table when you have some of the theme parks and hoteliers, in the room. But I have my pride and dignity intact, and I feel good about the decisions that I've made because all I'm really doing is asking intelligent questions that can only be answered with data. And if the more we lean into that, I think the better our decisions are going to be. But when you see people pushing to rush decisions, or you're pushing people to go around the data, you should be very concerned very quickly. And
that is like the MO of what I feel the corporate stronghold over Florida is, most of the mega developers are not doing it right. That's just how they've always done it. Mm-hmm. And they're not willing to invest in bringing on some other talent to help teach them other models. They just know how to masquerade for the cheapest return on their investment to maximize that return. And they build the same cookie cutter house. And there's no thoroughfare that is, a communal center, with real commerce and real mixed use and real walkability and all the things that we know that there is an economic return. I think the tourism industry sells itself short all the time. They spend money to lobby, to keep things as they are, when if they just did the inverse and explored ways that they could reinvest and partner and collaborate in ways to make the entire quality of the community better, they would have more of a return in the long run. But a common theme that every single piece of this conversation that we've come back to is that short-term thinking is ultimately hurting us.
Oh goodness, you're absolutely
over the
right.
long-term.
Oh my God, yeah,
projections.
You said it better than I. I mean, like every decision. I'm just on the little planning and zoning commission. We there's 9 of us. We meet once a month. We make decisions on a few things that are maybe impactful in some way, small in others. Every time we have those meetings, every single issue, I have a couple things that I filter through and when I think about it, and they're very easy to think about. But one of them is, what is this going to look like 100 years from now? And I feel like if we're not doing that on every decision, we're really selling our neighbors short. It is dangerous to be thinking how this is going to impact us in the next 5 years, because that's 5 years is in the blink of an eye. I mean, there's no way to justify these short-term decisions. All you got to do is ask. I mean, the corporations themselves are not evil, all right? And the people in them are not evil. I'm sure there are exceptions, but I don't personally believe that they're evil. I believe they are doing what they're supposed to do for the good of their business. All right. That good for them doesn't always align with good for me and my neighbors. Mm-hmm. And my neighbor's neighbors. Mm-hmm. And so it's on the people that are elected that make the rules that we all play by to look at the entire board, and you got to think more than one chess move ahead. You don't have to think 20 chess moves ahead necessarily and be a grand master, but you need to look 2 or 3 chess moves ahead here.
Hire one single economist on your team.
Exactly. The idea that Orange County doesn't have a full-time independent economist on contract that does not live in Florida and has nothing to do with the tourism sector or anything close to it. We should be able to take every single item that has more than $2 million in value that the county is going to spend on it should immediately be going to that company and letting them filter it through the same equations every single time and spitting back out based on our data that we keep up to date on a daily basis. We think that for every dollar you're investing on this, you're going to see a return of $1.30. Okay, now the alternative is you could do this other one and it's going to give you a return of $1.40. All right, all things being equal and there's no difference between them, let's go with the one that has a greater return. Mm-hmm. And we're not doing that. This is so simple. This is cookie cutter stuff. All you gotta do is plug in a few data points and you're gonna see, is this a good idea or is it not a good idea? And I question all the time why we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times it's because we don't want to rock the boat.
And I think the fear mongering and like the partisan talking points that really distract us are distracting us specifically from that. That I think they want to pull people in an emotional direction to turn people away from asking real questions about how we're valuing every dollar when it comes to like government efficiency. They're just saying, oh, well, there's waste, there's fraud. They're too woke. They're investing in woke things like homelessness and pedestrian crosswalks and all these things. When in fact, we as the voters are smarter than that. We can understand the return as long as you have a means of explaining it and an expert that we can trust. Right now, the tourism industry, I believe, is wasting money by not paying livable wages.
Sure.
Because they have high turnover.
Sure.
They're having to hire, recruit, and retrain over and over. Whereas if they invested and supported candidates that wanted to fight for affordable housing overwhelmingly more so than the Republicans that are actively rubber stamping, subsidies for these industries to be able to basically exploit our ability to afford to live here, it costs the tourism industry more. So then what do? They loosen child labor laws so that now they can hire children to work long hours without breaks, without access to a bathroom.
And it's easy to do that when you don't have to step over the homeless person and on your way into church because you don't live in the community to begin with. You're part of a corporation that's headquartered in Anaheim or in Belgium or in Philadelphia. Right. And I know I have a lot of friends who work at some of these major tourism industry leaders who, when I have these conversations and I say, why aren't we finding ways to increase the compensation for the people that are working these jobs long-term, increase their healthcare benefits? They're like, Eric, we would love to. It's just not up to us. These decisions are being made outside the state of Florida. And that happens all the time. We are the largest community in the country, in this case, the Orlando metro, to not have a Fortune 500 headquartered in it. We're also the largest community without any form of professional baseball. We're the largest community without an NFL franchise. And we have the worst funded public transportation system in the United States, period. And all of those things are related. They're all connected. The reason we don't have professional baseball, professional football is we don't have enough people who can afford the season tickets to actually attend 81 games a year for professional baseball home games and have half of those be season ticket holders, or the same with NFL football and attend 9 home games a year where you're going to have people purchasing $25,000 to $50,000 season ticket packages. Those are the starting rates, and so we just don't have the economy for it. We don't have a Fortune 500 company here because we've allowed other Fortune 500 companies to set up satellite operations here and really benefit from the community as a whole. And so when you have companies that don't have a real stake in the community and its improvement, what's the incentive for them to invest in the community? What's the incentive for them to find better childcare options for their employees, better healthcare options for their employees, retirement, and all those things? There's just not the incentive that's there. All you got to do is look at the difference between the I'm not going to pick on Walt Disney World because I have a lot of friends who work there and they're fantastic, but you look at where they're headquartered in Los Angeles and Anaheim specifically. The Disney Performing Arts Center in downtown Los Angeles is a massive, world-class, well-known architectural gem, right? We have the Disney Theater at the Performing Arts Center, the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center, and we have the Lake Eola Band Shell that was sponsored by Disney for a long time. we are the core of the Walt Disney Company's profit base. But because it's headquartered in another community, the philanthropy goes to that community. And that's just one example of thousands. You could say the same thing about dozens and dozens of other companies in the community, and people that might listen to this to say, well, why don't you talk about the other companies? Because the single largest employer in the community, the largest single site employer in the country, has to kind of talk about this stuff. Otherwise you don't have the street cred to if you don't back it up. You gotta be out there and having conversations about these things. If you want to be the big dog in the community, act like it. And I think that we are in a place where so many of these problems need to be tackled, but we are being stifled by some of the big businesses in the community who don't want that. I mean, for example, the Lynx fleet that serves Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County has roughly 300 vehicles in its fleet. The Walt Disney Corporation has more than that in their fleet here for just the resorts, significantly more. Communities that are close in size to us, usually we can compare to Austin, Texas, and Pittsburgh because we're very similar in size. They have over 700 vehicles in their public transit fleet, whereas we have 300. And that's not okay. And the reason for that is because I don't think the tourism community wants people getting on buses to leave the resort areas. We know that
purposely suppressed our ability.
Right. That's why Church Street is dead compared to what it was. It was the third largest tourist attraction in the state for many years was Church Street in downtown Orlando. Well, the moment Pleasure Island, which is now Disney Springs, opened up, it went away. The whole Church Street idea just went away entirely. And guess what? Disney didn't do anything wrong. They opened up a successful business, a successful model, and that's how market business works. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is that according to the Lynx CEO, who said this in a forum at the Chamber of Commerce 2 weeks ago, 75% of the ridership of the entire Lynx fleet is directly related to tourism. And it's not the people that are coming here to visit that are using it. It's the workers that are using it to get to their place of employment. And the investment from local hoteliers and theme park owners and large restaurant groups into the Lynx system is zero, right? So we have an industry that we are propping up across multiple different platforms. And yet we're not seeing the investment and return going the other way. We see it in what you just mentioned. You see it in political contributions and campaign contributions, but that's not benefiting the community. That's benefiting their point of view in the long run. We have so many other needs, and I don't expect Walt Disney World or Universal Studios or Westgate Resorts or the Rosen Center programs. I don't expect them to be paying for every public benefit in the community, but they need to at least not stand in the way of it.
Right.
And I think that, and I think the people who work here and live here, they would agree with me, but they can't say so because it threatens their jobs. And so we've got to find a way to make it easy for the leaders in the tourism community to actively engage in the long-term improvement of the Orlando metro area. And right now, I think it's a failure of local leadership over generations, as well as a failure of corporate leadership over generations. And frankly, also some faith leadership in this community, because they don't want to lose their constituent base as well. And so all of these groups need to come together and say, okay, what kind of Orlando do we want 100 years from now? And how can we all work towards that together? And we've done some things like that in the past. Jacob Stewart and the Regional Chamber of Commerce did the program myregion.org years ago, and Shelley Lawton led that initiative, and it was great, and it was bringing people together. And then it just kind of all stopped. We stopped those conversations. And I think part of the reason we stopped is because we're like, hey, we want to benefit the whole community, but we really need to make sure that we're meeting our goals and objectives for the company first. Otherwise, I'm out of a job. So there is a lot of room for improvement, but it's going to take some really difficult conversations and people who are brave enough to be part of those difficult conversations.
Well, I'm very excited that you're brave enough to step up to the plate and have those conversations. I think when I think of titles, which I hate that we have to put everything under a title, but when I think of the difference between moderates and progressives, frankly, it just comes down to who's willing to speak out and who just wants to kind of skate by and try to look like you're being amenable to all these different people, like a connector. But really, are you willing to stand up and fight and really speak to the needs and hold institutions accountable. I don't think we really need a title for that. I think every single political bucket should have leaders that are willing to do that. I just think we're at a place now where in order to see progress, we really need to lean into what that word progressive means. It's the future. It's being able to really speak to the needs of people. But one question I ask everybody who's on the podcast is, what is one thing that you do to replenish your cup emotionally? Like, you're out there, you're fighting all the time. You probably have seen some of the most heart-wrenching things. Like, after I cleaned up the hotel yesterday, I just told Ernest I had to come home and just cry because I just needed to get it out, what I saw. That's your literal day-to-day job. So what do you do to like fill your cup back up?
It's a great question. Not enough. I really enjoy spending time with my girls. My two oldest are out of the house and the two youngest are in high school, and they're just fun. You know, we whatever I can do to spend time with them, whether it's just driving them somewhere or going out to dinner with them and just listening. They fill me with a lot of energy and enthusiasm every day. I also have a granddaughter, and for
you
the first
two together, so cute.
Yeah, she's amazing. Unfortunately, she and her mom and dad moved to the Pacific Northwest because he's stationed with the Army, and they've been out there for about 5 months, and they're coming back in 2 weeks. I'm really looking forward to seeing him. Just spending time with her has been amazing. But when that's not a possibility, I usually just turn to my guitar and just play, you know, and I'm not a performer or of any type. I just enjoy playing and singing by myself. And I always seem to get more relaxed when I'm doing that. And then watching Gator sports, you know, Gator men's basketball season's about to start. So I'm excited about that. And
you hear that, UCF? He's a Gator.
Yeah. I'm a
traitor.
Gator. I come by it honestly, though. I was in the Gator marching band, so I feel good about saying that. And
I've just had so many Gators on this podcast. I'm like, I need to get any UCF Knights out there that want to come on the pod. We need to cleanse the room. I
like UCF just as long as they're not playing the Gators. I'm a fan. So I'll say charge on just like anyone else. But I really do. I mean, I'm a fan. I watch. I don't watch as much sports as I would probably like to, but I do watch every Gator football game and every Gator basketball game that I can get in front of. And I love being a fan. My grandfather was a huge fan. We used to talk about it all the time before he passed. And I am a fan of fans. I love seeing people who are fanatical about something, whether that's a team or music or the environment. I really enjoy watching other people and their fanaticism about one thing. I think it's fantastic as a uniquely human trait. And so, it's a great question. I'm not sure if I'm doing enough to fill my cup. I probably should do more, but.
That was perfect. So in closing, why don't you tell people how they can get involved with your campaign, how they can find you and what they can do to help you?
Sure. Yeah. Just like everyone, I have a campaign website. It's ericgrayforflorida.com. And all my social media channels are Eric Gray for Florida. And we have TikTok and Instagram and X and Facebook. And they're all out there. And we try to keep as much content on there as we have time for. I'm not doing it every single day like some others are able to. But every once in a while, some issue will come to mind that I feel like I should say a few words about it. And I like social media because you can put it out there and you're not forcing on anyone. If you don't want to listen to it, you don't have to listen to it, you know. But if you are interested in that person's opinion, then I can go and find it if I want to. And that's one of the beauties of this time and age that we're in right now. But that's how people can find me, is ericgrayforflorida.com. We definitely need a lot of volunteers, and we need donors, and I'm needing those, $26 donors to help me win an election in 2026. It's going to be a big deal.
$26 can go a long way in 2026 campaign. Yeah. And this is the most important election. I know we say this every election. It's the most important election. It's the most important election. But what we're seeing on our phones right now is unlike anything that my parents, my grandparents have ever seen. We're seeing really heart-wrenching things that are happening right outside our door. And the only way we can fight back is not to continue scrolling. It's to get off of your couch, to get outside of your house. And even if you can't, because let's say you're not mobile, or maybe you have back-to-back jobs and you're just so stretched thin, a small donation, even just 30 minutes of your time doing texting, phone calls, even just liking and sharing posts, even just sharing this video on some Facebook groups could go such a long way. And frankly, being brave enough to talk to some folks in your family about politics that you might not agree with. Some folks are, like Eric was saying, in his youth, are in these little worlds where they're not exposed to other ideas. You could be the conduit to helping someone understand something in just a different way, but it takes that effort and that time in order to do so. And so that's why I'm asking on behalf of my friend Eric here to please get involved. If you live in Florida or not, this race could be the thing that puts Florida in another direction that can help us get more electoral votes. It's a domino effect that could help make Florida like competitive again, and hopefully push back against Project 2025 that was implemented here in Florida before it was across the nation. And so I'm just super grateful for everyone who's here, who's listening. And thank you, Eric, for giving me all this time.
No, thank you. This is great.
So excited to watch you flourish in this awesome campaign. Have a good night. Thank you so much for joining us. And please like, subscribe, and share with all of your friends. And if you want to come on the podcast, send us a DM. Go to @organizingtovictory or visit us at organizingtovictory.com. Get involved with this movement. We want to hear from you, and we want to bring people on here that will teach us all one more step to justice. Thank you so much. We'll see you at the next one. Bye.